Imagine you suddenly find yourself having to reduce that incredibly large game library that you have in your closet down to just 10 games. What would make your list? Let's talk about that on this episode of the Tabletop Sportcast. Welcome back to the Tabletop Sportcast, where we talk about tabletop sports through game reviews, interviews, and project planning. Because the best sports stories aren't just told, they're played. I'm your host, James Cast, and today it is July 20th, 2026, and this is episode 261. Today, we are going to go over the 10 games that would make my final list if I had to suddenly shrink my large game closet down to just a small box. I am going to take a slightly different approach here today, and it's not going to be just my 10 best games. I think most of you could probably at this point figure out what would make the top 10 games that are in my library based on my thoughts, what I've shared. Nope, this has to be a slightly different list. Because if I was going to get down to just 10 games, and if this was going to be a permanent fixture where I would be reduced to these 10 games, I would need to take a slightly different approach. And so that's what I've done here. And I've also tried to think about this list a little bit differently and take a different approach. Because these lists, they're always going to be a moment in time snapshot, right? The list I make today may not be the same list that I would make 3 months from now. It may not be the same list I'm going to make a year from now. But for today, as of now, I've got my list of 10 games. And what I've tried to do here is think about if I really had to get down to just 10 games, what would I want my gaming experience to look like? Well, it should reflect the way that I like to game. And that means a little bit of a mix of everything. And I've made some harder choices, and I've also limited myself in some ways. Rule number one, I decided I would only pick one game per sport. There would probably be a couple of baseball games, maybe even a couple of football games that could make my list, especially if I was looking at like my top 10 list, especially if I looked at it like right now. I would probably be leaning towards a couple of different games for each of those two sports. I also needed to make sure that this final list had a mix of express games as well as full play games, because that's typically how I like to play. I wanted to think about, do I want some fictional in here? Do I want a strict historical replay type of a game? Do I play solo? Do I want to have games that might allow me to go to two-player versions? These are all things that I had to think about. Rule number 2 was also something that I thought about and decided that I would go with just one game per designer or game company. And that, again, really restricted what I was capable of doing. Obviously, I'm a huge fan of play games, and I could probably pick several games from their library to be in my final list, especially if I wanted to spread out across different sports, because there are a few sports that they kind of have the top of the line for, right? Like if I, think about some of their games, like they're the ones that I would go to for multiple sports. So I had to really limit myself from that standpoint as well. But all in all, when I decided to come up with this list of 10, it ended up being a pretty reflective list and kind of forced my hand in a couple of different directions. I had to really think a little bit more about what games were going to make that final list, especially as I put a couple of those rules into place. Only one game per sport, only one game per designer or game company. And so that's where we find ourselves today. So we're not going to do any of the round the table today. Not a whole lot of news from around the game companies to share. We'll probably catch up on some of that next week or the week after, to be honest. Next week, we're going to have an interview. We'll talk more about that at the end of today's episode. But let's talk about this list of 10 games. This is really going to be in no particular order. What I am going to do is kind of start with some of the ones that I think are, well, I'm just going to run down my list. Let's just go that way. So starting first and foremost, We'll start with the big wonder here. Where did I go with play? I mean, obviously, one of my favorite games is History Maker Baseball. But as I looked at my play library and I thought about the games that are in there that I really wanted to have represent in my final list of 10, I had to stay away from places where I've got other choices. I had to stay away from History Maker Baseball because there's plenty of baseball games to choose from, and there's a few that I do enjoy playing. I had to stay away from football games. Again, plenty to choose from, lots that I like playing. I really came down to trying to figure out between just a couple of games which one is the best one to represent play on this list. And in the end, I chose History Maker Golf. The hard choice was between this and Red, White, and Blue Racing. I think either one of those would have been really good choices to make this final top 10 list. But the idea of not having a golf game really kind of struck a chord. Now, when I think about these games, there's a couple of things that I was also trying to think of. Like, do I limit myself at all in terms of card sets that I'm allowed to bring with these games? And part of me was like, not really. I think I'm okay to bring a couple of different card sets. In the case of like History Maker Golf, I'm going to allow myself to have quite a few of the course collections so that I have a good variety of courses. But there was two things that really stood out to me about why I chose History Maker Golf over Red, White, and Blue Racing. And the biggest one is going to be the ability for replayability. I really like that with History Maker Golf, I can do the historical side of it. And I have no problem grabbing a set of golfers from a particular year or like all-time greats or anything like that and running through like some different tournaments using different courses. All that works really well. But then I thought about like playing in like the Play Tour or, these Play Invitationals, the things that Paul Salzgeber has run. And the idea that you can just go ahead and create your own golfer by selecting a few different qualities and just playing a round of golf makes this replayability of this game really high on the list. And so I think that became the edge. The replayability of Red, White, and Blue Racing is a little more limited. Yes, I can create my own set of drivers and things like that, but it's not as easy as getting a golfer created for History Maker Golf. And so first on this list of 10 is going to be History Maker Golf. I'm going to grab my first sport is golf. Get that replayability in, bring a few course collections along, maybe grab another set of historical golfers, and I'd be set as far as that game goes. So that takes care of number 1 on the list. Moving to number 2 on the list, we're going to stick with an individual sport, and I'm going to go to another one. Now, here was another really difficult decision for me, and we're going out to Stone Mountain Press. Again, if I was going to pick a Stone Mountain Press game that I tend to play the most often, it's probably Grid Zone. And I was super tempted to take Grid Zone and have it be like my one alt sport game. But as I looked at the library of games that are in Stone Mountain Press, I had some really difficult decisions. Now, with Hockey Blast and Soccer Blast off the table, Dice United and Stone Cold Hockey became really tempting choices. Still wasn't really prepared to go there, though. But the one that I really thought I'd be missing if I didn't have access to it was Legends of Boxing. So Grid Zone got put to the dumpster here, figuratively speaking, because it's not coming into my final list of 10, right? It's not in the final box of 10 games that are going to be on my table there. Nope, it's going with Legends of Boxing. And again here, similar to History Maker Golf, I went with some replayability. One, plenty of fighter cards to choose from. I've got a good collection of fighters, and I would give myself access to quite a few of them. I love the idea of being able to play different weight classes and everything like that. But then I'm also going to give myself the ability to take the career campaign guide with Legends of Boxing. And that, similar to History Maker Golf, gives me a ton of replayability. Now I can roll up any fighter I want and find any opponents that I need for them to go against. And I can just sit down and play that fictionally. I can play it historically and have just a lot of fun with it. So it covers both sides of the spectrum here again. I think Legends of Boxing is one of the great games that are in my library. I think it has a lot of replayability in my collection. It is one of the top games that I play over and over again, and it has been my clean-cut winner for the boxing games. And there's some other ones that are out there that are pretty good as well, but this one became the one that I chose from Stone Mountain Press. Now we've got 2 games on the list, History Maker Golf, Legends of Boxing, and for my third choice then, I had to decide now, where do I want to go for soccer? Because I really now have taken 2 of my favorite soccer games off the table with losing Soccer Blast and losing Dice United. And, given in the moment, the fact that the World Cup just ended, it would have been hard for me to just leave soccer off this list. And eventually there's going to be games sports that don't make this final list, right? 10 doesn't give me the opportunity to cover, but it should cover soccer. Now, in this case, I'm going completely fictional. I've decided to move away from traditional soccer games and going to another one of my favorite games. And this one actually happens to be a free game. And that is Footy, that was created by Bob Hansen. It's going to give me that soccer fix. It's more of like an indoor type soccer game. Footy, it's a 5-on-5 type game. But it gives me a lot of the elements that I get from soccer in a little bit higher action-paced type game. I think Bob did a tremendous job putting Footy together. I've raved about it in the past on the show. And as I looked around and thought, like, where am I going to get that soccer fix from after taking those other games off the board? Which would probably still be my 1 and 2 choices in no particular order for soccer games. Nope, I decided that this would be a great alternative. So Footy is going to make my final list of 10 games. Hey, it's free. I've got enough teams to work with in there from his fictional creations, and Footy is just a lot of fun, and I can play a game fairly quickly. So Bob Hansen's Footy makes my list of final 10 games that are coming with me so that I can get that soccer fix. All right, so let's go to that other sport that we talked about and say, now, where am I going to go now for that hockey fix? And again, there's a number of hockey games that are probably on this list. I thought about going more the express route here, and would one of the express type games work for me? And decided that no. What I really like with hockey is more of a full play type game. So I went away from that, but then I remembered that there was one more game out there that gave me the ability to flex between full play and more of an express type, and that is 49 hockey, 49 quick decks hockey or 49 highlights hockey. I'm going to give myself the option of taking both because it only means bringing like an extra card set or 2. Get to use the same team cards, take a couple of different seasons there. And I would have the ability to go between full play or more of an express type game. Highlights hockey gives me that express version, still gives me a good amount of detail. But I think because I also want that full game of hockey, I'd have 49 quick decks hockey, which to me is a really good representation of that full play game. So Grant Fine, hits it on the head, and 49 highlights hockey and 49 quick decks hockey makes my final list as my 4th selection for this group of 10 to help me represent the sport of hockey. And again, edges out a couple of other really close calls, but the ability to go between full play and express play was really the clincher here of why 49 sports games hits the list with both their versions. All right, we've got 4. We've covered a couple of sports, but we've avoided the big boys, right? We haven't hit like 3 of the big 4 sports. We hit hockey. Let's move to another one here with basketball. Again, had some tough choices when it came to basketball games, and I was really down to choosing between 3 different games at this point. Again, if I was really choosing like the best basketball game for me to take, if it had to be like the best one, it would probably again be like, Highlight Maker Hoops, probably just because I like the idea of having more of a quick play game when it comes to basketball. But after that, there wasn't really a lot of other quick play basketball games that I find to be like the ones that I would go to over and over again. So I kind of went back towards more of a full play version. And I had a couple of different choices, and this is one of those places where I had to make some tougher decisions about, like, which game's going to represent some different game companies. Went back and forth. I actually had 2 games that I was going back and forth with. Let's face it, 3. I was down to Status Pro Basketball, I was down to Bank Shot Basketball, and I was down to Matchup Basketball. All 3 of them do a lot of things that are very similar. I think they all capture basketball in a very similar way, and I was really tempted to take them. And now it became a decision of, okay, if I take basketball from one of these game companies, that means I take the other things that they offer off the table. And it was a really difficult decision. But in the end, I chose Bank Shot Basketball. Tough to leave Payoff Pitch off the charts. With History Maker Baseball already gone, I couldn't believe, I was down to like, wow, what do I do here? And now I'm taking Payoff Pitch off of the table as well. Yeah, tough choice there. But why Bank Shot Basketball? Well, I really like the flow of the game. I think it does a really good job of simulating basketball. I think it's a fairly easy game to pick up. Once I learned how to, play through that, and with the fast action cards, I think it plays really nicely. It's also a game where I can go between either pro or college, and he's even got some of the women's sets in there. And right now I'm probably more into like women's basketball than men's basketball. So that became a really good selling point as well. And so for that reason, and thinking that I could grab a couple of representations from different sport leagues, some pro, some college, some women's, yep, that's why Bank Shot Basketball was the one that kind of clinched the spot for me. And I went with Sideline Strategy Games here. So that makes their representation on this list. And I think I get a really good basketball game in the process. So Bank Shot makes my list. And we're about halfway through now. With basketball off, we need to now shift our attention to football. And you know what? Yeah, football. Some really tough choices here. You can already think of like some of the games that I had to take off the table here. Now, I will say that I am not a huge college football fan. And for that reason, it was easier to take matchup college football off the table. ST, has some really good games, but I decided to take matchup college football off the table here. Going to stick with more of a pro-based game. And for that reason, I also had to think now I need a game that really fits the way that I like to play football. Now, right now, I've been playing a lot of season ticket football, and that was super tempting to take that one. But the truth is, if I had to only pick one football game, I don't really want a full play football game. I want an express type game. And for that reason, Fast Drive Football from 3D6 Gaming was a easy choice for me. In fact, it was probably the first game that I put on this list, knowing that's the way I'm going to want to play football going forward. If I had to get down to just one football game, I'm going to want that express game. And Fast Drive, I think, does a great job of capturing the flow of a football game, but in an express format. I don't care about the stats. I don't really care about the stats in basketball either. Those two sports for me work a lot better as express type games. And for that reason, this one was easy. But I also just love the flow of Fast Drive Football. In this particular case, I'm going with the FAQ edition. Even though I tend to play more the dice and charts version than I do the FAQ version. And the reason I'm going to go with the FAQ version is I'm also going to grab with it with a couple of team sets. I am going to grab his fantasy draft expansion for Fast Drive Football because I find that to be a really enjoyable game to play that gives me just a little bit of a different flavor here. I will also say the other game that almost made the list was Breakaway Football. I was super tempted to go with Breakaway, but again, I wanted something that allows me to play more of an express version of football. And I think Fast Drive just hits that home run for me from having the right type of a game. I also felt like I needed more express games on this list in the long run. And that was one that felt like I could get to a really good place by grabbing an express game here. So there it is. Fast Drive Football from 3D6 Gaming makes my final list. Let's go to the other big sport here in baseball. So many games to choose from. We're down to a few game companies now. We've taken a couple of real big winners off the table, right? Took Payoff Pitch off. I took History Maker Baseball off the list. I don't think any of the other game companies we chose have really been big players in this space. I had to choose between, in this case, I was down to really two games that I was going to choose between. One was Status Pro Baseball, and Sports Illustrated Baseball is one of the ones that I could have gone with. I would choose Status Pro over Superstar Baseball or SI Baseball, even though I think I like both of those games a lot. Status Pro would win over those two. And there's a nostalgic reason to choose that. As I talked about last week, it's the first game I ever really got. So I was really leaning heavily in that direction. But even with Sports Illustrated, I had other options still on the table of games that I could pick up. So I switched course, and there was one game company that I wanted to make sure was on this list. And I actually think they have a baseball game that would fit very nicely and allows me to play baseball the way I would want to play baseball. And that is Season Ticket Baseball, Clay Dresslock's game. Has a lot of similarities to some of the other, sport games, baseball games that are out there. Gives you that kind of 50-50 split. Again, probably not like my top choice for a baseball game, but it has a lot of good playability there. Has all the seasons that you would need available, so you'd have lots to choose from there. Season Ticket Baseball makes this list as the baseball representative. A little bit of a dark horse candidate there, especially if you look at the way I tend to play baseball. Probably not one of the top 3 baseball games that I tend to get on my table, but it is one that I think has a lot of replayability. And I think that given what I had to choose for other sports companies, I think this is a really nice place to be able to settle into for baseball. So Season Ticket Baseball makes my final list here. That leaves us with just 3 games left to choose from. And now we've covered the big sports, right? I've got baseball, I've got football, I've got basketball, hockey, soccer, golf, all taken care of. I've even grabbed a boxing game at this point. So where do we go next? Well, now it's starting to look at the landscape. Think about the game companies that I want to have represented on this list, and also think about the sports that I want to have represented on this list. There was a couple of sports that are not going to make this final list, and I had some options here, but I decided against those sports. And at this point on the list, I'm also looking at it and being like, I've got a little bit of a fictional flair with things like the career campaign guide for Legends of Boxing, footy, even, as I mentioned, History Maker Golf with like the ability to kind of create my own golfer, right? So I've got a little bit of the fictional flair in here already. But where do I go now to really bring home and maybe even go into something that's not really a sim game? What sports are out there that could offer me an opportunity to get a game on the table without it being sim-based, and maybe even have something that's a little bit more fun to play with others? But in doing that, I also don't want to grab a game that is going to force me into only being able to play it when I have other people to play with, right? I wanted a game that could be played solo or in a party of people. And the game I went to next was Rallyman GT. So this gives me a car racing game. It has the ability to be played solo. I can do like fastest lap times and qualifying, all that kind of stuff, right? So I have the ability to play it solo, or I can play it in a group. And I think it's a really fun kind of group game as well. And it's not sim-based, right? This allows me to have a game that would be just playable on my own or in a party. And I was also looking at games like Regatta. Would that be a good choice? Or I think Long Shot, horse racing game, looking at games like that, Win, Place, and Show, not really a sim game, right? That's more of just like a fun like table game to have on the table. So there's a lot of those kinds of games that I was exploring as being possibilities here, but Rallyman was the one that I had. There are some other really good car racing games that are in a similar vein. Heat comes to mind, but not one that I own, right? So it had to be something that was in my library first, and Rallyman GT is the version that I have. So that makes my final list at position number 8. And again, these aren't really in a top 10 order. They're just kind of scattered throughout here, but that's the 8th game in my box. We're going to slide that in there. And Rallyman GT will represent car racing for me. All right, down to just 2 games. Well, the next big sport, and I had a couple of options here again, is going to be wrestling. I'm a huge wrestling fan. Now, again, one of my top games that I tend to go to a lot would be Face to the Mat, and that's off the table. I already filled the slot for play games. And now we kind of get into why, because I had Superstar Pro Wrestling, I had Book It as a good wrestling game, I had Legends of Wrestling, lots of good choices that are in my collection that could have been good representation for wrestling. But again, I wanted to go the historical route here. I really like the idea of bringing like those historical wrestlers on the table, and this gives you a good understanding of why I passed on the matchup football, matchup basketball, because I decided in the long run the squared circle was going to be the wrestling game of choice. Now, I would probably be able to take one or two books. I think if I was only going to take like two books, I'd have to take the core book just to make sure I had all the like basic rules and all that kind of stuff. And it's also a really good fed. And then I think the classic New York, the 85 to like 90 time frame, that's kind of like the sweet spot of the wrestling that I grew up on. So I'm going to take that classic New York, or the New York era and the mid 80s to early 90s, and as well as the core book, and those will be the two books that I grabbed from the squared circle, and then have St. Patrick's game be my representation or my representative for the sport of wrestling. And then there was one, right? The final choice. And again, really hard decisions now. Where do we go for this final game? Well, I mentioned Sports Illustrated earlier, and so many classic games that are in my collection that I've now had to pass on. Had to pass on Pay Dirt and Bowlbound, had to pass on Status Pro Baseball and SI Baseball. Really tough choices. So what's left for Sports Illustrated in my collection? It was down to just two games. And I'll kind of say the Avalon Hill games in here too, because I could even have still grabbed Win, Place, or Show, which was more of a 3M game. I actually have the 3M version, so that would have been a possibility. I could have grabbed Regatta. That was a possibility. But in the end, I decided to kind of go with, the sport that I really, really enjoy. Even though it's probably not a great tabletop game, I do think that some of the things that have been built for it make it into a much more fun game, and that is decathlon. Now, in this case, I'm going to take that Centennial Edition that Tom McHugh put together, and I'm also going to grab the heptathletes, right? So I'm going to grab those classic decathletes and the heptathletes, the Centennial version. I have the classic decathlon version as well, but yeah, that's going to be the final game that I'm going to pick. And I just love the ability to kind of sit down and either set up an entire schedule of like several track meets leading up to like an Olympic Games or a World Championship, or to just kind of do some matchups of one or two, decathletes or one or two heptathletes facing off against one another. I really enjoy the game. And being a big track fan, having coached the sport, it would have been hard for me not to include that into my final list of 10 games. So decathlon makes the cut and becomes the 10th game that I bring into that final list of 10. That final box, that one box that's going to pack, and probably going to have to shed tears on all the other games that didn't make the final list, right? But I feel pretty good with this list, and I have a lot of replayability. I have a lot of projects that I can do. I would probably limit myself on the number of card sets that I could keep for some of these. Baseball, probably grab a season or two. 86 would have to certainly be one of the seasons I would grab. I would probably grab another season from like the 50s, maybe like 55 or 56. I could see that being another one that I would really want to hone in on. So that would be something I'd have to look at. Football, again, probably going to grab something in the mid 80s there. 85, 86 would be kind of sweet spot there. I might even grab like USFL season. I think I would be really tempted to do that. I've gone back to that a few times with Fast Drive football. So that would definitely make the my list potentially. For basketball, again, limit myself a little bit, right? I really had a lot of fun playing with the 75, 76. I think it was 74, 75 ABA. I might grab that for bank shot. Probably grab like Caitlin. I have like Caitlin Clark's season, her final senior year at Iowa. I'd probably grab that to get some like both college and women's basketball in. So those would be potential winners there. Hockey, probably 93, 94. Huge New York Rangers fan. I mean, for all these sports, I would have to grab that one season for my favorite teams. And then for another season, tough choices. But, going back to like the early 80s would probably be something I would do, right? Gretzky, the Islanders. Like, I think like that, 81, 82, 82, 83, that would be a time frame I'd want to grab for hockey as well. And yeah, that would be it. That would be my list. 10 games. And that's all I'd be left with is just those 10 games. Looking at my closet now, it's scary to think that all those other games wouldn't be in there, right? And that I'd have to leave them behind. But that's what you do. When you have some tough choices to make, how would you make them? And if you got some ideas, if you, I'd love to hear what your lists are too. So feel free to send me emails on it. You can always email tabletopsportcast@gmail.com. Send me that email. Let me know what games you would have put on your list. When I post this on my Facebook page, facebook.com/tabletopsportcast, we post this, like chime in with a comment. Let me know what would have been your 10 games. What would be games that I missed on this list? What game companies did I miss? Just let me know, like, what some of those choices would be. There are some really good ones that I left off the plate, and I'm looking at them now and thinking, yeah, that could have made the list too. But, like I said, tough choices have to be made. So, and if you like episodes like this, go ahead and help support the podcast. You can do that at patreon.com/tabletopsportcast. $1 a month really goes a long way to helping to offset costs for the podcast. Probably be posting some more information there for those who I haven't really posted anything in a while, but I've got some new tournament pages that I can add in. So probably going to do that soon, and might even be working on a card set or two as well. So, if you're interested in some of that stuff, like hopefully I'll be able to get some of that information out there soon as well. But yeah, that's a wrap on the show. As always, you can catch this show anywhere you listen to podcasts. And if you haven't had a chance yet, you can also play it on YouTube. I try to stay on top of it going and being available on YouTube. So all the episodes are going to be going to YouTube now too. And maybe we'll get into some visual stuff in the near future too. But for now, it's all audio. So you can just have it on in the background while you're doing other stuff. That's a wrap on this week's episode. Next week, episode 262, we're going to be sitting down with Arthur Franz from Uplink Underground Games. They are the creators of Breakaway Football. And we're going to catch up with Arthur because they just finished a major play testing weekend on what's going to be the next big release from Uplink Underground Games. So we're going to be talking all about Breakaway Football Dynasty. So you'll be able to hear all about that. And game's probably a ways off, but we are going to catch up on everything that they learned during their big play testing weekend. But until then, thanks for listening.